to Off the Shelf. I'm your host, Yvonne Wolf. Today, our special guest is Debbie Rose. I met Debbie on Nextdoor, and she sent out a general inquiry saying that she was working on publishing a book and used some tips. And I wrote to connect with her, and that's how we met. Since then, we have this incredible, wonderful, enriching friendship. So I want to introduce you to my friend and neighbor, Debbie.
Hi.
So Debbie, it's so nice to see you on Zoom. And I remember seeing that post on Nextdoor, and I thought I'll make a contact and we'll have an interview whenever this pandemic is over. And we've had coffee before in person, before the pandemic started. And you told me this moving story about how you're not publishing your own book, but you're publishing this book for your daughter. Can you tell me that story?
Oh yes, my daughter wrote a poem in 7th grade, and about maybe 5 or 6 years ago, I came across it and thought it would make a wonderful children's book. But it took a long time because I needed an illustrator, and I thought it was like a pipe dream at first. What Jennifer was an excellent writer, and she had won a first prize in a young authors contest in 6th grade. And about 5 or 6 years ago, her best friend, who had started writing short stories, emailed me and said, "Do you still have Jennifer's short story?" So when I went to look for the short story, I found the poem as well. I'd forgotten about it. She wrote it in 1989. And when I read it, I thought this has to be a children's book. But I didn't know how to go about that.
Yes, and this children's book, that award-winning story, was at Springman Middle School.
No, that was at Pleasant Ridge.
Oh, okay.
The poem, The Saga of the Unicorn Horn, was written at Springman in 7th grade.
Yes.
But the short story was written in 6th grade. She always participated in the Young Authors Contest. She loved that.
And from what you told me, that was something very special because middle school were not very easy years for her.
Well, the first year was wonderful. She was an extremely bright kid who, her personality was that she was very independent and determined, but she was also a real risk taker and a real adrenaline junkie. She wasn't an easy kid to raise, but academically, until 7th grade, she could not have been better. She seemed to be very cooperative, but that's only because it's what she wanted. And she set a very, very high bar for herself. And she always liked to participate in those. Things changed in 8th grade. Yeah, very drastically. I had no clue that she was going to do a 180 the next year. Because that 7th grade class, she was talking, the teacher was preparing them for college. There was an advanced class, and she was telling me about what kind of college she was going to go to and how she was going to take AP classes at Glenbrook South and Latin, so it would help her in college. And then in 8th grade, she did a complete 180. And
she really knows what she wants, right? She really knew what she wanted. She didn't like the way the school system was run, right?
Well, I think it was when she became a teenager at 13. I always expected her to be rebellious, but I didn't expect it that intense and that early. And she just exploded with rebellion that January. Started with me, but she basically said to me one night when I said she couldn't go somewhere that was inappropriate. I thought that she was no longer going to allow any authority figures to tell her how to live her life. Yeah. And in the last quarter of 8th grade, she approached the school authorities and told them she wasn't going to do any more work. So they were alarmed and told me I had to have her psychologically evaluated because bright kids don't do this.
Yeah.
The reality is, because she was bright and knew she could do it, is why she did it, because she was good at thinking outside the box.
Yes.
And she explained to me, well, they can't hold me back legally, because she knew a rule. I didn't know that you have to fail 2 quarters. And when I go for a job interview as an adult, no one's going to ask me what my 8th grade grade point average is.
Right.
Or was. So I said to her, well, you're not going to get placed in the classes you want next year. And she said, oh yes, they're going to look at my test scores and they're going to put me in honors classes. And she was right. That is exactly what happened. There was nothing wrong with her. She was just rebelling. She wasn't psychotic.
And I think in the 90s, the school system was also more rigid and wasn't really allowing students to have as many.
I guess it was, and that particular principal was new, and she was going to make sure everyone knew who she was in charge and not Jennifer. So they went head to head.
Yes, yes.
Which is not the way to approach Jennifer, and it was pretty ugly. But she graduated and went on to GVS.
And that's how Jenny ended up in Glenbrook evening school.
Well, not directly.
Not
no.
directly.
Jennifer went to 3 different schools in high school.
I didn't know.
I assumed she would change her attitude in high school because she couldn't use the same excuses that she gave me in 8th grade. I didn't really understand why she was doing this, but she actually told her counselor at the first meeting that she didn't want to be there and she wanted to graduate as quickly as possible. Counselor said, you can do that, take extra classes. And then she proceeded to fail almost everything her first semester, which was due to absenteeism. Cutting classes the first quarter, being suspended a lot the second quarter. She just missed too much school to actually pass anything. She actually passed her Latin class and failed everything else. But I had already asked them to evaluate her for special ed. So that was already in the progress. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the semester, they placed her in an off-campus school. It was in Lake Bluff, so her transcript says her credits were earned at Lake Forest High School. And they actually threw her a lifeline because this was the fastest way for her to fix the mess she had made. Right. And to do that, she had to go to school all summer, full time. So her sophomore year, they kept her there in the morning and sent her to Glenbrook South in the afternoon. And then in her junior year, she was back there in Glenbrook South, behaved herself, did okay. It was an easy year as far as school was concerned. And I didn't ever understand why she was doing this, because I knew she still had the same goals she always had, to go to college, to have a meaningful career. She became very political. She was talking about every issue that you hear about in the news today.
Yes, yes.
She was a vehement feminist. Yeah. She was a social activist.
And she was the forerunner. She was way ahead of everyone.
This was the early 90s, and she was a teenager. She was just talking about it. Most adults didn't know she felt this way, but her friends all knew because she lectured them all the time. She read the book A Diet for a Small Planet at 15 and became a vegetarian because it was better for the earth. This is what she explained to me, and she was a vegetarian the rest of her life. So I was wondering why she was deliberately shooting herself in the foot as far as her future was concerned. And one day she said something, maybe she was 15, and she just said, well, college is serious, so I have to have fun now. So her plan was to have as much fun and do as little work in high school as possible so that she would not be distracted in college. And she had no doubt that this was going to work out for her.
Well, she had a very unusual path, but she went to Peace Corps. She went to the Peace Corps as a volunteer.
She went into the night school her senior year. That was her choice because her friend went there, and she kind of cornered me into it. I didn't have anything against the night school, but I didn't think it was the right place for her, and I didn't want her to have so much free time. But she orchestrated it so that she went to we registered for senior year. She went there for classes all week. I thought everything was fine. No one called me. At the end of the week, she called me at my office and said, I want to drop out and go to night school, and the dean thinks it's a good idea. So I was really backed into a corner, and before I knew it, and my only argument was, well, you're going to destroy any chance you have of getting into the U of I. And she said, oh no, I already talked to a rep. He said I had everything I needed and it wouldn't matter what school I graduated from. So she had planned this out for a while. And then she put me on the phone with the principal of the night school, who was a wonderful man. And he talked me off the ledge and set up an appointment for me the next Monday. So that's how she ended up in the evening school. So she did fine there and graduated, and then got into the U of I just like she said she would. So, she did everything she said she was going to do. And it worked out for her. And then
Yeah, I don't know. I should, yeah, envy you for having a child who knew what she wanted to do, or it's a harder to parenting.
It was
Hard
very
to
hard.
parent someone like that.
It was very hard. And then as soon as classes started at U of I, she did her 180 again and became an A student
Yes.
and graduated summa cum laude, majoring in sociology and minoring in her favorite subject, women's studies. And then she decided at the end of college that she wanted to go into the Peace Corps. So before going into the Peace Corps, she worked in the city as she had to wait for her placement. So she worked in the city as a foster child caseworker at Cabrini Green.
Yeah.
And then she went to Africa.
And many volunteers for Peace Corps are like her. Brilliant and
I think so.
Active, socially active. They want to do so much for the world.
I think so too. Yeah, and they're adrenaline junkies too that want to see the world and do all. She liked the idea of putting herself in a very difficult situation to see if she could handle it. So she lived in a village with no water.
She liked challenges.
Yeah, there was no running water, no electricity, no phones. She wanted to see, could she do that? Immerse herself in another culture. And then she was planning to go to law school and study international law when she got home.
And then we come to this time that it is the 20th anniversary upon her passing.
Yes.
Right, this year?
And, at the end of the month. Mm-hmm.
Yes. So can you tell us about this? Because when you told me about this story, I was very shocked. But I didn't even know there was a commemorative wall project with Peace Corps volunteers.
Well, I think you're talking about the website started by the Macs.
Yes.
The government really, I think the government would rather not let anyone know that people have died in the Peace Corps. It's not good PR. So there's no government action to do any kind of memorial. There is a wall inside their office with names on it, but there's over 300 people who have died and there's not that many names on it. I know that.
Yes.
But there's another family who lost their son a couple of years before Jennifer died. Donna and Chelsea Mack started a website for us. This is not done by the government. And their goal was to get some kind of permanent monument for the Peace Corps volunteers who have died. Since there's over 300 since the 60s, and there's always almost never a year without someone who's died. So
in the 60 years of its existence, in the 60 years of existence, it's lost 300. Now that's a sizable number who have died in service. In service of United States.
Yes, it's kind of shocking. And their website does list every single name that they could find all the way back to the 60s. And they offered every family a page to put pictures and writings, whatever they wanted. And it's just a wonderful service they've done for the parents of these, or the family members of these individuals who've died, to have a place to put that. But I don't know that there'll ever be a national monument.
So, Debbie, I've been to your garden. You have a beautiful garden. You have a little corner for Jennifer.
Yes, yes. In the corner of my yard with a beautiful fir tree uh, and a little statue that the story is too long to explain right now, but it's the Savannah bird girl, uh, a famous statue in Georgia that I purchased for her garden.
Yeah, and that memorial garden is something you can see all the time, for
And
in
see
your
from
home.
right from my kitchen, I can see it.
And you had that before the book.
Oh yes, I
Yes.
did that. I think I planted that tree the next year. Actually, my ex-husband brought it over. It was a little tiny thing in a pot, and now it's about, I don't know, 8 feet tall.
And yes, and then with the spirit of that, I like to show them your book, and
Yes,
show everyone your book, and this is Jennifer's book,
yes.
and this is the story, and you found, and you this journey took you a while, but um, whose help have you sought out? You have told me about you had to get graphic artists,
Well, the first
layout.
thing,
Maybe
right.
tell us a little bit about how you made this book.
Well, the first thing
Corn.
yeah, the first thing I knew I needed was an illustrator, and I didn't know how to go about that. And I really just thought about it for a year or so. And I worked for actually a plumbing and heating company that's from it's fourth generation from 1890. It's family owned. I've been there for 50 years, and it's like a family. And the daughter-in-law of the owner went to the Art Institute for college, and she had started working in the company as a designer. And one day I just thought, well, I'm going to ask Chris for help. I did not ask Chris to do it. I asked her to, if she knew anybody
Yes.
she could recommend who was an illustrator. I was really blown away with her answer, because she just looked at me and said, what do you need? Now, I knew Chris since she was a teenager. She knew Jennifer. And she said, what do you need? And I told her, and she said, well, I can do it.
I just want to show some of this pages
Right.
inside.
Her artwork is beautiful. And it took her a while. It took her a year or so, to maybe two, to actually get this done. And she wrote all the words exactly as Jennifer had written them, and did all these drawings, these paintings. And then she uploaded it to a website she was used to that really does photo books. And we got our first copies was a hardbound book. They were like $50 a piece.
Yes.
And we bought a couple, and there was an error. She mixed up the pages, and then we bought a few more, and then I found another error we had missed, because we're not expert editors. But my goal was to be able to give them away. So $50 a book was too much. So that's when I did not want to deal with that website anymore, because it was just a one-on thing. It didn't mass produce. Each one was $50. So
yes, how many did you decide to print?
well, yes, with your help, I went on Nextdoor and had some responses, and met with you, and then you connected me with two other authors who had produced children's books. And it was Ray De La Cruz.
Yes.
After our conversation, and like the last part of our conversation, I said, well, I knew that there were self-publishing companies out there, but I was uncomfortable with the idea that they might take over my book and want to change it or take ownership of it or something. So I was hesitant to use them. And I asked him which one he used. And he said he didn't use a self-editing company. He just used a printer in Mount Prospect. And he gave me the name. So that's when I went to made an appointment, went to see the printing company. And he said, sure, just bring us the pictures. Well, then I found out that the artist no longer had the pictures. She had uploaded them and not kept them. So then I had to go to Elmhurst to get digital images done. And then,
very nice.
right. So I finally got the digital pictures I think early this year. January, and
Mhm.
took it to him. And then by the time the prototype was ready, COVID had set in.
How did that affect your plan for this book?
Well, it was difficult. So, but the printer was so nice. He had somebody deliver the prototype so I could approve it. And then one day, without even telling me, they just delivered all the books, and I ordered 250 because the more you ordered, the less expensive they were.
Yes.
So I was afraid to even, this was the beginning of the real scare, and I was afraid to bring the boxes in the house. So
Right. Right.
I left them in my car for 10 days, and then I opened them up and looked through them. But then it was a few more months before I could go out and buy.
Yeah.
Stores were closed to buy envelopes and go to the post office for people that didn't live here. So, but I
Debbie,
did.
yeah, I remember you said that you had about 70 people who are friends and families or who knew Jenny who wanted a copy of this book. And that was your plan. Your plan wasn't necessary to sell it.
No, I don't want to sell them.
Yeah, and you have been able to distribute them, uh, many of
Uh,
them.
yeah, I think I have about 175, 125 left, maybe, or something. Yes, I just give them out to people that knew her, some people that didn't know her, some neighbors who have young children. It's a very appealing to. Well, what I ended up getting was a paperback. So this
Yes,
is the
I think the
paperback.
paperback's beautiful. And
Yeah.
Debbie, have you, yeah, tell us who you have read this books to, this
Well,
precious book to.
well, at first I took them to Colorado, read them to my grandchildren, and my at the time my middle grandchild was 4, and it just warmed my heart because it became his favorite book. And one day his mother overheard him. He never, of course, knew Jennifer, but she overheard him telling his babysitter about his aunt who had died, his mommy's sister.
Oh,
So, I felt like I accomplished my goal. But I do find that little 5-year-old children just adore this book.
yes, yes, and that's very gratifying to know that Jenny's story could be told and that she can, through a book, her nephews could get to know her.
Yes.
And I just want to commend you on that. It's taken a long time for you to get there, but I feel that this has been a wonderful project. I have, during the pandemic, there's a friend of my mother's who lost her son at age 36. And now I'm telling her your story, that perhaps she could make something out of her, out of his, he has a huge following as a food judge. Yeah, and his collection of pictures could become some kind of a book so that her grandchildren could meet him through a book.
Yes. Well, I'm a co-leader of the local chapter of the Compassionate Friends,
Hmm.
not it's an international bereavement support group for children. It's for grandparents, parents, and siblings, not for every kind of loss. And people
That's
do all kinds of things. They start uh, fundraisers and set up memorials, and people do all kinds of ways,
yes,
find things to memorialize their children, and it's very important. It's very important to
it
keep
is.
the
It's
child's name alive.
especially when publishing is easier now.
Yes,
It's so much easier, and the amount of social media, sometimes the text is and visuals are already there. So, and you are part of well, we will have that website on our program as well. So that bereavement, national bereavement group,
it's an international organization. It
international.
started in England about 50 years ago.
Wow. And how do you volunteer in that group?
Well, I was contacted and asked to come because there was another mother in the group who had lost her daughter in Africa in the Peace Corps. And I wasn't actually going to go, but my ex-husband really needed something. He was having a very bad time. So I said, why don't we go to this together? And he went for a while, but then I made friends there and I stayed. And then as they needed people to step up and take responsibility for certain roles. And so in 2004, I became the treasurer. And then in 2008, the leader who had been the leader for 10 years said, I'm done. And so I said I would do it with another friend. And
So,
so she does most of the leading of the groups and talking, but I
yes.
support her with the paperwork.
Yeah, so through this organization, you were able to help other people. So I think this is just a very inspirational story that we have to share with our listeners. And thank you, Debbie, for being here today.
Well, thank you for having me.
And thank you for watching Off the Shelf. Join us next time on a new episode.